Okay, so this brings us to the conundrum of sorts as to, so what do we do with this? Because clearly we are against the lockdowns and the complete abrogation of basic human rights that are going on in the name of this scamdemic that's going on right now. So what position do we take? Because knowing full well, 100% knowing that the narrative controllers who function by controlling narratives. That's what they do. They create narratives for the public to react to, essentially. And we know 100% they are going to create a second wave, whether real or fake, and they are going to blame it on freedom protesters. So that's baked into the cake, regardless of what we do. So some people might take a look at that and in some way vaguely imply that, well, you shouldn't be out there protesting for your freedom, right? Is that what we should be doing? So we should just go and lock ourselves in our house, and that'll teach them, because then they won't be able to blame us for not getting out of our house. But that seems like 8 levels deep of second guessing yourself and then ending up doing what they want in the first place. So what do we do proactively going forward from this place? Brad, let's start with some of your ideas.
I liked the idea of a drive up protest. I know some people got out and they were able to frame those people as the bad guys, but the idea of staying within the bounds of what they're telling you to stay in, so not giving them a reason to vilify you, but still causing a ruckus, which you can do with your cars, and anything that, honestly, using civil disobedience techniques that groups like Indivisible are using, flooding emails, jamming up their servers, stuff like that, where you can get mobs of people. There's a perfect example of how to disrupt that has been going on the past 4 years from these groups like Indivisible. And they're using all of these, they're server crashes things, they're flooding emails, they're giving people scripts to call. I'm not saying we should do that, but I think those targeted measures, because where you can mobilize people right now is online. That's where people can be mobilized, and I think that is an angle to go with it.
I'm a little afraid that this is like you see in Event 201, but just obviously, like, when is Twitter going down? When are they actually, they talk about anti-government protests and violence against healthcare workers triggering the crackdown, and that the suppression was going to move from healthcare messaging to political messaging. And I mean, it's a very difficult question, because it is all about the messaging, down to where, like, the numbers aren't even real. So for me, I do remember that it did not ultimately work, but it really had an impact, was when we marched against, I never got off the couch in my entire life, but I did, first time I was really politically active, physically active, was for the Obamacare, against Obamacare, because I just felt like the tipping point, the government would take over more than 50% of the economy, and then you could just never get it back. And I just thought, if they took away the First Amendment, the worst thing that's happening right now to me, the number one problem is they're taking away the First Amendment. So I think that it's critical to reassert that strongly and as quickly as possible. Now, you're probably not going to get the law-abiding people to break the lockdown. So I do still think a 4th of July march on Washington to assert the right to assemble, because they can actually control social media. So it's almost like, and even the vote is probably going to be even more controlled. The only way to really assert is a show of hands, which would be to be there. And then I would say on top of that, keep the focus on the feds and keep the messaging crystal clear, which I would say are two things, like the stop messing with the data, however you want to say that, and restore the Constitution, or repeal legislation enacted while the Constitution was suspended. I mean, you just stay on those two messages and actually physically show up. That's my hope.
All of which brings to mind 3 points for me. One is related to what Brad was saying with regards to civil disobedience online, which I think I take an all of the above approach. I think everything that we can do, we should be doing on all fronts all the time. And I'm not here to restrain anybody from anything. I would say that, as I pointed out on New World Next Week last week, for example, in Russia, they're doing online protests where they mark themselves on a traffic map app thing that people have, and they mark themselves as being there, and then they write a comment about their protest or whatever, so everyone can virtually protest at some embassy or something, even when they're locked in their house. And I said, well, that's a creative way of doing this and getting the word out and showing the protest. But it also speaks to my mind. I mean, first you have free speech zones, and then you can't even physically go to free speech zones. So you have to virtually mark yourself on a map as going to that free speech zone. I mean, it's just, we keep getting more and more boxed in terms of what we're doing. So I agree we should be doing that type of civil disobedience, but it has to be more than just that. I think we have to insert ourselves into reality. Secondly, I think that conversations like this can be an inoculation, because inoculations work. Inoculations of truthful information. So when we point out this narrative before they really unroll it on the public, and we point out they're gonna say second wave and they're gonna say it's the damn freedom protesters, it's gonna happen. And then when it happens, people will have been already seen the narrative before it was presented to them, so they will perhaps be able to snap out of the conditioning that makes people believe that. And then thirdly, I think, yes, we do need to have a crystal clear message. And that crystal clear message, in my mind, is that pandemics are not a reason for taking away fundamental human rights. And that is really the underlying issue here, because absolutely, as you guys go over, as I go over, the numbers are all nonsense.
Yeah.
But that isn't the point. The point is, if this were really happening, if there were an infectious agent that was causing death on some scale, then should the government be able to lock us all in our houses? And the answer should be a clear and resounding no. We have to reject that principle so that they can't use this type of statistical chicanery to make people go along with it.
That's what I thought was the fatal error of these protests, is that day one, libertarians and anybody who's thinking was saying right away, you have no right to do this. We don't need the data. You have no right to do this. Not to mention that the fundamental laws of civilization have emerged among us, which are a biological species, in the presence of pandemics. I looked up what were the the colonial era pandemics, and they were everywhere. They were crossing borders and everything. So coming out right away and saying you never have a right to do this, certainly not at the federal level. Yes, that would have made that message very clear. Now it looks like I need my burger.
Yeah. I think I might have heard from you the idea about drones, having drones and kind of that can be expensive for some people. I was thinking about that's a great idea. Remote control cars, anything that you can control that can be disruptive to people. I think any stuff like that gives people a way to protest without fearing that they are going to come under the wrath of the law, without having to ask them to do something they're not completely uncomfortable with.
Well, keep in mind, any form of protest is going to be demonized at some point. So if there is a widespread cyberspace, disruption of some sort, then they're going to say, see, this is why we need to control the internet. And you're going to have to sign on with your thumbprint and eye scan to get on the internet. And I mean, we know that's coming long term as well. So this is the way they set it up. Anything that you do to resist will be used as justification. Again, it's because they can control the overall narrative. If they can get enough people to believe that they're the good guys and these crazy protesters are just insanity, they're just absolutely off their rocker and have no reason for what they believe, so we have to contain them in some way. As long as enough people go along with that, anything that they roll out against the population will be lovingly embraced. It's not control or surveillance, it's contact tracing. Oh, what a wonderful word. God. Oh.
Yeah. One-on-one conversations, too. They've tried to make that impossible by not allowing people to get 6 feet of each other. Anytime I see somebody,
I'm just like, I don't believe in this, right? Because I want people to know, to just start cogitating. And what Binkley pointed out right away is like every single communication now is monitored, is put through a tube. They can hear it. You've got to shout. You just can't have that. But I think that physical interaction, they know how important it is. That's why it's in the First Amendment, and that's why they're hitting it hard.
Such an important point. Social proof of the fact that you are not alone. You are not crazy. A lot of people think like you, and to model that and demonstrate it and to point it out to random people that you encounter on the street, if you're allowed out of your home, this is BS. I don't go along with this, and just model that for people. And I think people will be surprised how many people will be receptive to that. Other people will be confrontational about it, but I think it needs to be done to show people that you're not alone. There are other people who disagree with this.
Absolutely. Part of the narrative right now is, oh, these protests are all organized by right-wing gun people, and this is a small percentage of Americans that don't really believe these things, which I don't think is true at all. It's called, I believe it's the spiral of silence, where most people have a belief that goes against what they think the majority is, so they maintain their silence. But in reality, it's actually a silent majority that just isn't aware of each other.
All right. Such an important conversation. So many important points to cogitate on. I know a lot of the corporate report community will have some comments and things to add to this discussion. But before we wrap up, are there any other points that you would like to make along these lines? Monica.
Well, the only thing that I think is critical is to not allow them to set your own narrative, not allow them to trigger you. I absolutely believe that when we go back out there, they didn't flatten the curve. They set up a spike, and that we will go out there, people will get sick, people will freak out, and it'll create this tension, that Democrat-Republican tension. Both sides are going to have provocateurs. There's snipers on both sides. And I think that it is absolutely critical. I mean, libertarians, liberty lovers, people who understand the Constitution, fundamental principles, are actually the rational ones. They are the rational ones. So when you have people like on your side who are acting irrationally, don't lose heart, distance, be skeptical, and keep your head.
Brad?
Absolutely. Swallow the politicization of it, swallow the emotion they're trying to trigger, and ask questions and talk to people.
All right. Well, this is the start, I think, of a conversation that will be ongoing, I think, for a very long time. And I know you guys are having that conversation on a regular basis at thepropreport.com. So I will definitely refer people over to that. Monica, tell people again how they can find your work and your social media feeds and other ways they can access you.
Thank you. You can find Propaganda Report. Everything we do is under Propaganda Report on your favorite podcasting feed. Our URL is thepropreport.com. And Binkley is at FreedomX Radio on Twitter. I'm at Monica Perez Show on Twitter. We do a lot of stuff there, but we also have a forum and chat on thepropreport.com. So I've been deplatformed numerous times from WordPress. YouTube took me down. I got from terrestrial radio. So you're probably going to end up having to find us at thepropreport.com.
And Brad, how can people support your work?
You can become a patron saint of the Propaganda Report at patreon.com. I know a lot of people don't like it, but that's the platform that we are using right now, and that is the best way to support us. That and share the show, tell people about it, tell one friend about it.
Excellent. All right, we'll leave it there for today, but I hope we can continue this conversation in the future. Thank you guys for your time.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.